Greetings, this is Gemini Brett and Maurice Fernandez, broadcasting live from Seattle, Washington with Scorpio Jupiter on the rise, a sign we share.
Ahead of the solstice, the dramatic alignment with Venus, opposing Mars retrograde on the nodes, and Jupiter's rising now.
There's a lot going down. Jupiter in the 12th house, the water sign. And Maurice and I share several signatures, but one is the Scorpio sun and another a Gemini moon. And the sun right now is shining from the degree in between our moons. And we got Scorpio on the rise, so this feels like a wonderful time to be here now and speak to some of our friends. And I'm going to surprise you, Maurice, with a few slides. So buttons. One of these and one of these. We get to see a couple humpbacks.
All right.
In front of the snow doing the Pisces thing. So I hope everyone out there is doing really well. Maurice and I got to speak at his place, at your new place in Sedona, a year ago, a little less. And we were talking about Leo and the eclipses and Aquarius and Scorpio. It's a fun conversation. And we attempted to broadcast live on the Cosmic Intelligence Agency page, and tech did not agree. But I'll post a link to that. And you can find it on my podcast page at SoundCloud. Just search Gemini Brett. All right, so first things first, pick a planet, my friend. We're going to drink a little snow honey chrysanthemum tea. That's the ascendant and descendant axis, which of course is also the 12th house, one of our primary themes to address today. Pallas Athena for me. The Venus with a straight edge. And then we'll pick one for Spirit, who's being represented today by Pisces, Smurf. You want to choose? One more cup. Earth. Earth, Pallas Athena, and the ascendant. The horizon, much more important. Because the horizon, the ascendant, I mean, it's not just the first house.
Absolutely.
The descendant is not just the 7th house. And the equinoxes are not just Aries and Libra. And the solstices are not just Cancer and Capricorn, right? So
we were just talking today about the fact that the spiral of evolution moves through the sign both clockwise and counterclockwise. So there's a motion from the ascendant to Pisces to Aquarius, the same way there's from Aries to Taurus and Gemini. And these cycles occur simultaneously. You know, that's part of the beauty of, and the complication. Many things are intercrossing, many things are intertwining, and we need to break these codes and understand what it's all about. How does it all work together?
The beauty and the complication. It's a wonderful way to begin. So I wanted to show these humpbacks. This is Maurice's new book, Neptune, the 12th house, and Pisces. And Pisces.
Yeah, it's not a book about Neptune in the 12th house. It's about Neptune in each house and sign, different planets in the 12th house, all of them, all signs and planets in the 12th, and then planets in Pisces. So the reason why I wrote about all of the three is that they represent an archetypal theme as a triad and capture, the same fundamental essence. And it's been a very extensive research. This started in the year 2000 when Jupiter just entered my 12th house in Gemini, opposing Neptune in Sag. That's when the concept was kind of birthed about this book.
When was the first edition released?
The first edition was released in 2004, 4 years later. And that was a time when I just moved to the States. So I didn't have a lot of experience and it was a little rushed. So, but I was happy at the time with the book. But then through the years, so much more material came through. New insights and, the same theme, basically, the same concept expanded. So this edition is it's about double the size.
Wow.
Of the first one.
Did you cut anything out of the first one?
Yes. There was a whole chapter on the ascendant and the 12th house. Talk about that. That I want to write a separate book about. So, and about the angles. So I felt like, there's enough to read. It's quite extensive as it is. It's 500 pages. Let's give our reader a break.
Well, I've read 4 paragraphs of the book so far. I got my copy today. Maurice is here in Seattle. He spoke last night at Washington State Astrological Association. And we'll tomorrow have a workshop. So if you're in the Pacific Northwest, come up for the workshop. The talk last night was amazing. There's a lot of astronomy at the beginning, which of course made me very excited. And the subtitle of the text is The Timelessness of Truth. And the talk last night, which wasn't about Neptune, it was about Mars. Maybe we'll get into Mars a bit today too. But it had a timeless quality. I was really amazed by how much information in a very beautiful flow you were able to get in, where we spoke about the astronomy and the periodicity and the rarity of how close Earth and Mars will be this summer, and then got into the mundane and then the practical. And there was a few points throughout the course of the night where I was very engaged and excited and didn't want it to end, but it was like, wow, this must have been 5 hours now, because so much information was coming through. I feel Neptune can do that sometime. So anyway, I read, I have Neptune Sagittarius, born in 1975, and then Neptune's right on my descendant, the cup that you drew. And so I turned to Neptune in the 7th house, Neptune in Libra, Neptune in the 7th house.
In Sag.
Oh, sorry, Neptune in Sag. But I turned to the Neptune in Libra portion, which also describes Neptune in the 7th house. And it was amazing because you and I had just had that discussion that I don't want to bring back in, but about other people and judgments. And the first thing I read is the evolutionary path of finding the middle way, and how we can't create without two. And I was sitting outside and I just set it down. I was like, oh, that's deep. And this is my house is covered in books, and the good ones want you not to page turn, but rather read a paragraph and sit and meditate. And what I received in that paragraph was strong enough to send me straight to sleep. I went and took a nap, which is a wonderful place to engage with Neptune. And we have a Cancer moon right now, and tune in. And actually had a dream of a whale, which was pretty fun. So I think these good books too, it's not only the ego that has me want to turn to Neptune in the 7th house, because that's my personal signature, or Neptune in Sagittarius. It's something about connecting to the planetary essence, which we know. But the good books, you want to read it all. Not just because I'm an astrologer, I'm going to be sitting with people with several different configurations, but because you're speaking about the evolutionary essence of these different houses of Neptune. And I really look forward to reading the text.
Yeah, and it is a deep book. It may require a few read, because I converse with a few people that went through it and read it, and it seems like you get a first impression, but you find out many more things as you go through a second read. You know, it can sometimes confront some of your, you know, especially people like us who are spiritually involved and researching it. Some of these ideas can be controversial. So,
Do you want to give an example?
Yeah. You know, when we speak about spirituality, and especially Neptune, we speak quite often. You will read and you'll think about surrendering the ego and about transcendence. And of course, that's Neptune.
Mm.
But that's also the trap for Neptune. Because Neptune, on the one hand, wants to rise above the ego, but it also suffers from not knowing what to do with the ego.
Mm.
So there's a whole, the whole existential struggle of being on this planet is captured in the 12th house. And that's where we have the ascendant between the cosmic womb of the 12th house and the birth of individuality in the first house. And there's that barrier that we need to cross. And quite often people who have a strong 12th house or a strong Neptune have a trauma of birth, which means they don't want to be here. And they're not equipped, they're not ready. And that's actually part of the lesson for Neptunian people or 12th house people would be to get an ego, do it. So it's the reverse of what, we're taught in many schools of spirituality, to get rid of the ego. Here, it's actually sabotaging yourself. You need to descend in order to, bring all the pieces of yourself together. So that's one example.
Yeah, there was a bit, well, in that bit I read, I guess I read more than a paragraph. But where you were speaking about Neptune 7th house and the evolution of relationship, and how the hedonist kind of needs to reflect upon or find the middle way with the asceticist. And the opposite would be true, that we can't just attain enlightenment by sitting on the mountaintop.
Exactly. And especially for a 7th house Neptune. And we tend to think of the 7th house exclusively about relationships.
Yeah.
And it is, that's a main focus of the 7th house. But it's much deeper than that, because it has to do with any polarity. And people who have strong Libra and 7th house signature will be controversial people, because they always bring the opposite perspective, the less accepted, the underdog. And, Edward Snowden was one of the example I chose for that chapter, with Neptune in the 7th house on the nodes, because he's so controversial and he's bringing those polarity, and people see him as a traitor as well as a hero. And that's exactly what that can get to with the 7th house. But one more thing, I will recommend, at least for your first read, is to actually start from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because the book is written through many layers and sections, 7 stages of evolution. And if you sometimes just jump to the chapter of your position, you're not going to understand what these stages are about and why do we progress from one to another. So that's,
it's so not Neptunian to jump straight to me. There's this thing that's said about 12th house, or I've heard it said about Pisces, that Pisces is the loneliest sign. And I don't personally tend to agree. I see that signature. I see how that can come alive. But the way that it was described to me was that because it's like you're out all alone on a boat at sea. But for me, that energy is the sea itself. It is that water that describes how we're all connected. Like, I mean, if we think about how even Neptune was discovered in 1846, Uranus had been discovered in 1781 with a telescope, kind of a freaky accident, the discovery of Uranus. Herschel and Caroline Herschel and William Herschel thought it was a comet, and they tracked it, and new planet. I mean, you think about the paradigm shift of a new planet being discovered, since Saturn was the last for cosmology for ages. But with Neptune, we knew where to point the telescopes because it was noticed that something was pulling on Uranus from the outside. And so even in that teaching, we hear that we're all connected. We all have pull on one another. Really, we're all in the same boat, as
Absolutely.
they say.
That's actually a phrase that I do use in the book. And that's a blessing and a curse. Because now, for example, with Neptune being in Pisces by transit, and there's a whole section about the transit of Neptune in Pisces at the end. Being in the same boat means that if one person fucks up, we're all paying. The consequences of mistakes are global. And the same thing with the solutions. If a person comes up with, a peace plan or a solution, it will affect everyone at once. So being on the same boat is indeed that feeling now with Neptune in Pisces, that the clock is ticking. The environment is in crisis, and there's nowhere to run. You can't just go to another country because it's global. The crisis is global, and the solutions will be global as well. So this is why many people with a strong 12th house and Pisces are easily overwhelmed, because there's a feeling that you absorb everything.
Yeah, I think that empathic gift is opening for more and more people now. And that really does feel so often like a curse. Like, how many clients do I sit with who can no longer go out even to the grocery store because they're feeling everyone's energies and they haven't navigated yet how to keep their own skin.
Exactly. And that's part of get yourself an ego.
Yeah.
You're fusing with everything and everyone. You're losing yourself. And it serves a purpose. There's a higher frequency to that, but it can also drown you. So, we all our spiritual practices teach us to ascend and to elevate and to transcend, and we detach from flesh, from matter, and we demonize the ego. And it leads to a crisis. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I love that I drew the Earth cup.
Exactly.
I just realized I've been drinking spirits tea, and I switched the cups too. That's a Pisces thing. I think that's going down. But this Earth glyph, I could have just shown this. The medicine wheel. Why does the east rise? It's because the Earth falls in that direction, right? We're spinning that way, and so our experience creates, in a sense, this illusion of the east going up. But as matter, we're actually going down, just as we descend and come in through the canal in this descending way. And we know the water glyphs and the air glyphs point down the chalice, you know. And
now think about the fact that throughout centuries, and that's something you've researched as well, throughout century, there's so much abuse of the feminine.
Yeah.
And it has to do with that, because the feminine is the force that brings us into incarnation. And we don't want to incarnate, we want to transcend. And so there's some kind of war against the feminine that's also instigated by the fact that I didn't want to be here. And I don't want to descend. I don't want this birth canal. I want to go back to paradise, go back to God, reascend. And it has to do with the polarities of the genders. And of course, there are historical sequences to this. But, you know, the feminine, if we look at the feminine sign archetypically, they are the signs of the flesh. They are the sign of incarnation, of embodiment, of matter, the earth sign. So it's, you know, it's like a resistance to that.
We walked today in my favorite place here in Seattle, Lincoln Park, and walked down the beach and took the slippers off and cruised out. It was very low tide, moon and sun together up, culminating, and all these barnacles in the rocks, I feel cutting me, and clams are spraying, and we got into the slimy, funky stuff, and then walked up the hill, and Maurice led us through a very short kind of kundalini practice. And I'm just not so in my body, and so the pain is coming in, and it's so easy for me to just sit here and perform mental calisthenics. And I don't think like the feelings are off limits to me, but you know, this is an experience so many people have when they come to spirit. Like I sit with a lot of folks who receive their opening through yoga, and they went, for example, to exercise, and suddenly they had a spiritual experience, and now they're studying, you know, the Upanishads and the Vedas, and then they head to yoga teacher training. And it's a very common experience for people in that yoga teacher training where they're doing hundreds of hours and consistently, to have this emotional release, the flood, I mean, the deluge of something that's probably been hiding and trapped in the body somewhere. So I think that's a thing that I'm just connecting to in myself whenever I get into the body and stretch. So it's like, wait, I need to do this more. Maybe some of the reason why I'm not is because it's keeping me from seeing some of the things that I want to be hidden.
Maybe. And it's also because we take, you know, we're conditioned in some ways to prioritize the higher realms, especially where we're at in our spiritual development. But yeah, and you know, one thing you will read as you go through the chapters, we're gonna, you know, you have a Venus square Neptune. It's pretty tight, right?
Yeah, it's 5 degrees, but Neptune's transiting opposite my Venus, like exact right now.
And so you have Taurus in the 12th house.
Yes, in the south node there.
So the ruler of Taurus is Venus in the 12th, and Venus squares Neptune. So that Taurus Pisces signature is very strong for you. And it's that. It is flesh and spirit. It is, you know, the embodiment and transforming your body into a temple, just like this house of yours is very much a Venus Neptune house, because it's a physical manifestation of spirit with all these mandalas and you know, the ritual with the cups. Everything in the physical must capture something spiritual. It's not random. And it obviously has to do with the relationship with our own body as well. Because you can live as if your body is a cage, or if your body is a temple. You know, you can choose which will be your experience with that Venus Neptune. And I've done, a great deal of research on that. And I even, we talked about this. I presented a talk at NORWAC last year about spirit and flesh, and that talk, was very controversial. People kind of left in the middle. But it was about seeing, on the one hand, the excessive attachment to flesh and the greed, the appetite taking over, versus the ascetics who, will shave their heads, will cover their skin, will deny themselves pleasure because that's antagonistic to spirit. So each of the positions of Neptune and the 12th house takes you through a step in our spiritual journey. But what I really try to do is not speak, just in those higher realms. That's why it's divided into 7 levels, because it's also addressing the daily functions. What does that mean on a day-to-day basis to have this position? And that's what I think makes this book accessible, even though it is multi-layered.
Flipping through, I was interested. I didn't stop at the page, but I was interested to see that one of the chart examples was David Icke. And I bring that up because he's one of the main voices of this kind of Earth as a prison planet movement. And I think that is I won't say a remnant because it's so alive, of this idea that we're only meant to ascend and get out of here and get out of the body. And I think people often treat Neptune like that's the Neptune signature because it's invisible and heavenly and some destination place.
But, quite frankly, people who have a strong Neptune and 12th house feel much better when they are in the ethereal realms. It's hard to be incarnated. And that's why they don't know how to cope with suffering. Because if you have a typical Aries or Taurus who is incarnating, they have coping mechanisms. It's hard to be here, but I know what to do. I know how to fight. Pisces comes here, it's like, I forgot my kit, I'm not prepared. And that's why it becomes such an overwhelming experience. But it's the reason I chose David Icke, it's in the Saturn section, talking about that. And, he's out there. And he spoke about Saturn, and he has Saturn conjunct Neptune in the 12th house. And he spoke about Saturn being, the control center of evil.
Right.
And so I thought it was just too weird and too synchronistic that he has Saturn, Neptune conjunct, and he's fighting Saturn. He doesn't get along with Saturn, with the actual planet.
It's interesting. Saturn and Neptune were conjoined at Neptune's discovery in Partiles, same degree in Aquarius. So there's a couple threads I want to finish weaving. And there's one thing where we talk about we're all in the same boat, and Neptune is the seas, and that includes agape, universal love for all. We're in a time where in the English language there's only one word for love, and we're kind of missing what the Greeks taught in these many different ways. And one was that essence of love, the universal love, which is, it speaks in so many ways. I think of Venus's exaltation in Pisces. And here we are on Venus's day today, by the way, for the recording for folks listening later, June 15th, 2018. And Moon is applying to conjoin Venus. Moon's in Cancer right now, and Venus is very recently ingressed Leo. And it's about 12 hours from right now. that moon will find Venus. And we have a clear night in Seattle, so I look forward to going down to that same beach tonight. We'll see this sliver crescent moon, Diana's bow, holding this radiant evening star Venus right now. And in the shamanic astrology Venus work, is where I got my start in the shamanic astrology mystery school. We see this at the time in her cycle, which began way back in March of 2017. She was in Aries and she found her way between Earth and the Sun, retrograded back into Pisces, remember, and was with Chiron right when she came direct. And since she's become visible as an evening star, the moon has joined her 3 times, and tomorrow morning will be the 4th. And so we see that as kind of the ascent of Anana back from the underworld and reclaiming first the red robe root chakra and the second chakra and the third. And so tomorrow begins a month of coming back into the heart. On the way down, Venus is a morning star, cleansing and releasing and death and rebirth, and now reconnecting and reconfiguring. And so I love that she's in Leo, and the sign that's so associated with heart. Yeah. And in a fiery heart in that way. So we don't need to go into the Leo realm because that was our whole conversation last year, unless you want to.
Oh yeah. Well, just one note about agape and universal truth. That's part of the subtitle, the timeless truth. That which is true always, everywhere, with everyone. You know, it's beyond our individuality. And every chapter has a section about addressing the timeless and time and space. Because we live simultaneously in 2 dimensions, at least. And that's part of our dilemma, is how to navigate from one to the other. So, you know, going back to that sense of universality and compassion, how do we deal when we need to face competition? When Mars comes in and says, you know, there's a predator that may get me if I don't develop a defense mechanism. So that's why we are so confused and freaked out, because we feel universal love. At the same time, we feel the need to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're constantly in this juxtaposition of conflicting currents and feelings. I feel open and trusting, and then I need to protect myself and withdraw. It drives us nuts.
Yeah, I speak also of Neptune, more Pisces, but both, not as just the endless seas, but the rain, right? Because it connects the waters of heavens and the waters of earth, and there's that endless cycle. And
Absolutely.
But here in Seattle, you know, one of the Leo trainings in Seattle is months and months and months of the year where you don't get much sun and you have to find your inner light. I feel like that's been my most important training here, is finding my light, filling me with me. And we'll see what happens when I find my way down to California and a little more sunshine. But that idea of the rain and that connection, and it gives us time to ponder and that, but it can be so fucking depressing.
I mean, I lived in Hawaii on the west side of the island.
Yeah.
I think, talking about rain, it was one time 6 weeks nonstop rain. It drives you crazy.
It does, right? And that, I mean, so that depression too, of connection, of empathy, where it's such an amazing realization to connect to the truth, I would suggest, as many spiritual systems do, that we are all one. But then that pain of when you're feeling the world's pain and terror, and absolutely. It's hard not to just run and hide under a rock.
Absolutely. And, you know, these are interesting times. I mean, speaking of transits, this beautiful moon Venus, which is a very strong feminine energy in this, in Leo, the heart, and opposing Mars retrograde in Aquarius.
I wanted to show you a picture. Look at this. Is your book. I wanted to show you this picture. Do you want to say something about the book while this image is up?
Just one note: if people are interested in the book, it's not yet available on Amazon. It is available on my website. And interestingly, with this Mars in Aquarius, there's been a challenge with the website Aquarius, and it's running a little slow. So be patient, and you can basically get it from there, or you can email me directly and I'll send you a copy. So it will be on Amazon in a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks. You know, that's the process.
So MauriceFernandez.com if you're listening in. All right, so I'm giving away a lot of my slides, but I wanted to kind of surprise you with this one. This is the Peace Monument at DC. And it's on Pennsylvania Avenue, coming right out of the Capitol building on the way to White House. Where very interestingly, Andrew Jackson put the Treasury building and disconnected this sight line from the White House. Sirius rises over the Capitol, and from the Capitol, Aldebaran sets over the White House. But this Peace Monument's very interesting. We have, you know, a couple goddesses here kind of crying over war, and then this one holding the laurels, and you see little baby cherubs near the seashell of Mars and his war helmet and sword, and Neptune looking so innocent. And I was thinking of that because last night you were here speaking about Mars, and tomorrow the workshop's about Neptune. And so I think this monument's kind of speaking in a sense to Marines and Navy in that kind of trip. But just looking at this goddess holding the laurels up there, I don't know, it's something I've sat with. It's
and she's the ascendant,
right?
She's the ascendant between the 12th and the 1st.
Yeah, right. We tilted on its side, and Mars as Aries in the first house there, and Neptune as the 12th. And here's this cup you drew of the horizon line. And that's, you know, it's something that's really interesting because there's so much demonization of the 12th house in the astrological tradition. And I mean, one thing everyone here probably knows that I study astrology with nature. And so to contemplate the 12th house and the first house, and I would just sit east for 4 hours at night, you know, and just be there and witness what's going down. And one thing I realized about the 12th house some time ago is like, oh yeah, of course, hidden things, because trees and mountains, like I can never tell you what star is rising, even if I have a pure horizon, unless I'm up on a mountain with the water, there's waves. And I've learned how to find the ascendant actually in the south, which is the most visible place for the northern hemisphere. But that idea of trees and things that are actually blocking my view. And when I've shared that with students, they say, well, why isn't that also true then of the 7th house, you know, the descendant, because there's trees and mountains. And but for me, that we can watch the sun moving from the 9th and through the 8th down to the 7th as it falls, and we can, or Venus or Mars, and we can project where they're going to go. And we have all these projections in relationship with 7th house theme. When we're looking at the 12th, the sun rises. I mean, it's so glorious every time. And it's shocking. It's like, where did it come from? There's so much mystery there. And, you know, in the old myths and traditions of sun rising out of the underworld and being lifted up. And Maurice and I were speaking about this theme a bit earlier and talking about when the moon rises and it looks giant, right? Like I've driven, when I was a touring musician, I'll never forget this night. I had to stop the bus. I was driving in the middle of the night, and I was driving into the moon somewhere in the Midwest, like Nebraska. And it took up the entire like 4-lane highway. I was driving right into the moon. And I mean, I was just astonished, you know? And it's this illusion because we have streets or trees or something to compare the moon against, and it looks so huge. Where up in the sky, obviously it's small, and there's a trick where if you put your thumb at your arm's length, you'll see that it covers the moon, whether it's huge on the horizon or up here. But the really powerful question that you asked me that I hadn't considered before is, well, which one is the illusion? Mm-hmm. I mean, the moon is almost a quarter size of the earth. Mm-hmm. And so it should look huge like that. Mm-hmm. And the moon and the feminine and the dream, mm-hmm. it is huge, right? But it's the 12th house kind of brings those challenges. Another thing that just came in is like, I grew up in the desert, and you get that mirage thing, or mm-hmm. it looks like water because of the heat. Yeah. So how do you address this idea that the 12th is hidden things and mental hospitals?
Well,
and prisons?
You know, ask Madonna, who has 5 planets in the 12th house, if she wants to hide.
Yeah.
It's not clear cut.
Is that Leo's?
It's Leo
rising in her sun.
Virgo rising.
Okay.
And she has Mercury, Pluto in Virgo, and Sun, I think Uranus, Venus in Leo.
I will ask her. I'll call her as soon as we're done.
I mean, I can only imagine if Madonna was having a reading when she was a teenager, and she would say, you know, what am I supposed to do when I grow up? Mm. And someone would tell her, God, you're doomed because you have all these planets in the 12th house, and it's undoing, and it's, you want to be behind the scenes. She's not going to believe in astrology after that reading. So there is an aspect of hiding in the 12th house. And from the Neptune cycle, the reason it's because it's the place where we are the most exposed. But it's also a place where we are completely bare. So exposed and bare makes you, on the one hand, walking the ground of Eden in full trust and spiritual connection. So it's a place where you're actually innocent. But because of that, it's just like this concept of oneness. You suddenly realize when you are here incarnated that you don't know how to deal with that. And you become overexposed. You know, you don't, just being out in the element, naked, you're going to get a sunburn or wet, whatever. Now think of Madonna. Think of all these strong 12th house people, Neptunian people, Piscean people, who are actually very public, exposed, and how they swing from wanting to hide from the public and the paparazzis and all the fan wanting a piece of them versus needing to be the leaders and the entertainers, and you'll see the 12th house has to do with actually public function, with exposure, with fame. And it is the dichotomy of fame where you can touch the collective consciousness and you can inspire people across boundaries, whether you know them or not, through this. This is kind of a Piscean medium that transcends time and space. We don't know who's watching. It's collective. It unifies all the viewers.
Right. And
we don't even have to personalize it.
So this meaning the internet and our ability to Zoom broadcast. I mean, speak about
and
film.
when did that happen? During the Uranus-Neptune conjunction. Right. So think of being completely exposed and then shutting down and needing to hide. And you hear, you know, Michael Jackson with a Pisces rising moon and Neptune on his north node. You know, he's such a Piscean Neptunian person, living in Wonderland or Neverland, and being so innocent, Peter Panish, and being, you know, this larger than life myth, but then being overexposed, even his skin getting damaged and sick. You know, you can debate what created that, but it's that sense that his skin couldn't even protect him, like the pigmentation problem. And you know, he sang this song "Leave Me Alone," or "Dangerous." You know, that's the name of his album.
Yeah. And I'm bad.
And I'm bad.
And it's like, but everybody believes it. But you know what I heard from him? I was eating the other night, and I'm looking at the man in the mirror, which is such a beautiful song. And it is that realization, I think, where we have to balance the oneness, and we are all one, of doing our own work and coming into me. And so much of that happens at the ascendant, right? I mean, that is relationship too. It's just relationship between us and something higher. But it's just so fascinating to me that the 12th house has spoken about that, which is hidden because it's where the sun rises, or Venus, right? Anyone. And then the first is spoken about this kind of place where we're consciously aware, but it's the one that's underground. Right? I mean, the ancient way is actually one of the place of the most powerful suppressions was at the IC, the bottom of the heavens, the bottom of the chart, the place where the sun is at midnight. We don't need to go there now. But what is it an illusion that we're treating the 12th as the place of prison and
no, it's
wards?
not. I think it's part of it, but we need to understand why. Why is it about being hidden? So when you understand that the need to hide comes from overexposure, it puts a completely different spin on that. Because what comes before is the exposure. It's not the hiding. And the reason is that people with a strong Piscean and 12th house quality come into this world bare, trusting, and then they are shocked by the fact that, you know, there's separation, and then there's violence, and then they're not equipped to deal with it, and they shut down. So commonly, you know, someone with a Pisces moon will be extremely compassionate because they feel everyone's pain, right? And they will protect everyone, and so they're so inviting. And then they become overwhelmed, and they want to save everyone. They can't.
Right.
And then they isolate. Or their house becomes, you know, a rescue center of pets that is taken over, and they can't manage it anymore. I mean, it's just an extreme example. But there's that feeling that, first of all, I'm completely open, and I want to be with everyone, and I trust. And then I realize, God, this place is a construction site. And that's one thing, that one of the big lessons of the book is, this world is not finished. It is a construction site, and we're still working on it. But from a 12th house point of view, we think it's ready. And when we see that it's not done, that there's, what's the polarity? Virgo, 6th house, work.
Right.
You have, you know, take your tools and start contributing to the endeavor of creation.
And why would you ever work if you think it's done?
Exactly. And that's why Pisces has to do with vacations, when Virgo has to do with employment. Where do you go when you're on vacation? You go to a paradise resort where you escape time. That's a 12th house experience. So why are prisons related to the 12th house or these big institutions? Because the 12th house is a place where we're not in control. And everything is larger than us. Even our popularity, if we spoke of fame, is larger than us. I mean, if Gandhi had a 12th house son and he became an icon, whether he planned it or not, and he inspires people beyond time and space, like he's immortal, and that's the 12th house sun. But it is also the feeling that someone could overpower you. The system could overpower you. If Saturn's in your 12th house, you can be overpowered by the system, the law, the authorities. And that's why there's a persecution complex with Saturn in the 12th. And so it can get to the point where you are confined. But again, what I find it important is we need to understand where it's coming from. You know, we make all these blanket statements and we don't know what's the root. Like, how did we actually get to that statement?
Right. That to me is the most important thing in astrology. And it's so much of it for me, unlike you found astrology at a young age. Yeah. Was it nodal return, your first one?
Yeah.
So 18 and a half, 19. And for me, the second one, 37. Yeah. So you're 6 years my senior on Earth and much more than that in astrology, in the heavens. But it's really important because I think a lot of people want to find the formulas, apply the equations, and feel like that'll do. And to me, if you don't know the proof of the equation you're using, then it's just mechanical. There's no heart, there's no intimacy, there's no understanding of it.
And it's fragmented.
Yeah.
Instead of having a process, a cycle, you have bits and pieces. Oh, you know, behind the scenes and prisons and spirituality. Like, how do all these pieces actually connect to one theme?
Right.
And how does that connect to the 11th house and to the 1st and to the 6th? Like, there's a dialogue between all these places.
There's a
thread
that connects 11th being the revolutionary and 12th of spirit and 1st, you know, identity in some ways. But Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world, right? And because I think sometimes in the 12th house, which some have associated guru, since it's the last on the wheel of life, and the traditional association with Jupiter, maybe who carries that name in the Vedic tradition, the Yoda's tradition, and belief, and maybe more importantly, faith, something that we can't see but is also real. But I think the Bodhisattva, and somebody who's found enlightenment but comes back around again and again and chooses to stay in the prison planet until everyone has found their ascension path. And it just seems this really weird trip of martyrdom programming. I remember talking to a friend who's a Buddhist, and he was talking about his practice of meditating upon samsara and releasing the world from illusion, and how the work is to sit and pray for the world. And my response to it is, well, what about you? What about reflecting on how that's in you? So this is, I'm looking at the man in the mirror. And I think it really comes alive in this essence of the ascendant and the heavens rising because the earth falls. You were speaking the other day about, last night at your talk about Mars, of that Martian impulse of birth, of being born, coming from the 12th, you know, which I, like you, have described as the cosmic womb, or the waters of the womb, in this safe place where you've been eating through a stomach snorkel and comfortable in the darkness where the dream can exist. And
you're passive.
Yeah.
You know, you're receiving in the 12th house. That's why there's a positive side to the 12th house of not being in control. We tend to think of not being in control as a dangerous thing because you could be in danger. But Pisces people don't want to be in control because they trust universal providence. And there's that sense that, I didn't make the sky blue and I didn't make the earth fertile, and I'm just receiving this gift. So it's our memory of paradise where everything, was taken care of and was perfectly aligned. And that's what we want to yearn to get again. But is there a way back to the womb? Or is the way forward? That's another big question. Because every spiritual system will tell you, we're here to experience, but then eventually we're returning to the source. And that's, with that, there is some kind of attachment or hope of deliverance
of heaven
and paradise, because we remember it somewhere. There's a place inside of us that knows what universal love is, knows what peace is. And we didn't learn it from Trump and Kim, or from our teachers necessarily. It's very deep into our own womb experience.
And I think that is some of the ascension feeling, is that there is this return ticket. There is this indistinguishable light,
Agreed, but that's exactly part of the reason why we perpetuate suffering.
Right.
Because the more you want to get away from here, the more you sabotage yourself.
And I think in a lot of the trainings, and I'll go here. I mean, the idea that selfless sacrifice is the only way to the heavens, which seems to be the strange kind of Piscean age interjection.
It's Jesus
on the cross. But I mean, Chiron, who gave himself for the release of Prometheus,
but he saved himself.
Was put in the heavens.
But he saved himself, Chiron. He had a self-preservation.
Well, he didn't know he was going to save himself, though. That's the whole thing. He thought that there's no reason the two of them should suffer for eternity. One of the conditions for Prometheus's release from this endless torture was that an immortal must choose to take his place. And Chiron, now in a state of eternal suffering, said, why should there be two of us? I will. And honored for that gift of compassion and that gift of empathy. So the compassion and martyrdom are very interesting.
Absolutely. And it's definitely a 12th house thing. And it's interesting that astrology gives us the answers, because we do have a 12th house that speaks of oneness. And so, I can give my life for you because you are me. And saving you is saving myself.
Yeah.
And so that's a completely 12th house experience. But then you also have a first house.
But saving yourself would be saving me, if the other were true.
Exactly. Because you have a time and space factor that interjects here. You are in a position of vulnerability now. And so I project that on you. But then you have the first house and the fifth house that says, yes, but if there's no self-preservation instinct, you're not helping creation. One thing you're going to tell a parent that, for example, are in a miserable marriage and they stay together because of the kids, you're going to tell them your unhappiness will transpire and condition your kids. So your kids are not going to be happier because you didn't break the unit. They're going to mimic the martyrdom. And therefore your happiness as a parent will inspire your children to be happy. So as a service to them, take good care of yourself. Obviously not to the point of, I don't care about you, I'm only going to take care of myself, which is the other polarity of, too much separation and not remembering why you're doing what you're doing. But I agree that, this whole book touches on the martyrdom factor. And in a way, the reason is that Pisces doesn't know how to deal with suffering in the first place. It doesn't have the tools, the equipment that a Scorpio, Scorpio deals with pain, faces it, cries, but then, rebuilds and repairs and ascends as a phoenix. So there's a lot of focus and strength in that transformative process. But Pisces doesn't know change. It's like
because
transformation.
Everything
is. There's nothing to change. It's perfect.
Right. Yeah. Everything's as it's meant to be.
I mean, Pisces don't like to psychoanalyze, at its core. Obviously, I'm generalizing.
Yeah.
They look for the simple truth and the universal truth. That's when something is timeless, it's not changeable. And they know that. So when you want to make a change, they don't fully understand what you mean. Anyway.
Yeah, I just saw a friend when I went out to the coffee. Maurice was here working on writing for Career Astrologer you're working on. Yeah. And I saw a friend, and he's assisting promotion, actually, a lot of the themes that we've been talking about for a person's spiritual book. And I said, well, what's the book about? And this guy had the somatic experience. He went out of body and he saw the oneness, and now he's a messenger. And I said, how's that? Good luck with that. Because it seems so impossible to communicate that dream of oneness. We have this language for it, and we have this desire for it. And we've touched that space in meditation or ceremony. We realize that is what's real. But there's something about perhaps the illusion or the necessity to not live in that space for us to do work in this world to reclaim it, or let that thing that doesn't think it needs to evolve to evolve. And perhaps that's part of what this is about. As you're speaking earlier, and I'm thinking about the impetus of the survival instinct as the state of coming to spirituality.
Think about Leo. You're going to read about Leo. Oh, they're self-centered and they want the attention. And then you're going to speak about Leo. Oh, it's the heart and it's the generosity. How do you reconcile these? Because Leo is definitely about taking the stage. But from a Pisces point of view, and you see that as an inconjunct, a quincunx, Leo says, I'm here and I have a job to do. Versus Pisces says, I don't want to be here. And you have that push-pull, that inconjunct that, gives you, what is the reason for me to be here? And people who have that Sun 12th house or Sun Neptune interplay will experience that. But the real deeper meaning of Leo is that taking the stage and being visible is actually a service.
Yeah.
It's not about getting praise. It's about showing up. And when you spoke of the sun rising in the morning, that's exactly it. The sun shows up and it's never abandoning us. So if Leo wouldn't do their quote unquote self-centered performance, no one would be on stage. We would have a vacant leadership, a vacuum. So part of the work of being here is actually part of the Piscean service as well. And from a different point,
Leo Smurf. Yeah, I feel that in these many levels, right? There is that lower, I need the stage, I need the spotlight that's described as Leo, but the higher essence, and not even the highest, but is the stage needs me because I am the spotlight, the radiant one. And it just feels so important. This idea of I came to a rainy land to find my inner light. I'm finding that more and more in the spiritual cleansing and these kinds of things and release. It's so important for us to fill ourselves with self, with my own spark.
Let's speak very practically. Astrologers, very gifted. They may have a lot of knowledge, but then they don't like to market themselves. Oh, I don't want to put myself out there and promote myself. It seems so self-indulgent.
Or even receiving money for something.
Or receiving
spiritual.
money. But what you're doing, if you are not understanding that the need to promote yourself is because you have a service to offer. And if people don't know about your service, they're not going to get help. If we're not speaking about this book here, and we can say, well, this is so, indulgent promotion of your book. Like, why are you doing this? But in some ways, I know this book can help people. They can help, learn astrology or learn about themselves. So to me, speaking about this and taking the time to be on stage is because I know it's important, not just for my fuel and describe what I'm doing, but it's also that role that this book or me or you have to play in the creation. And that's why Virgo follows Leo.
That's helping me ponder too that quincunx you mentioned before of Pisces, Leo, or Leo, Capricorn, or Pisces, Gemini. Sure. I'm actually wanting to show you this chart that I'm sure you have seen. And so our friend Neptune and Neptune's discovery, September 24th, 1846, 12 a.m. and 15 seconds. They actually had it down to 12 a.m., 14 seconds and some change at Berlin Observatory, Germany. Cancer on the rise, last degree of Cancer on the rise. But we see this exact partile conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in Aquarius. And what really interested me when I was looking at this today was this yod. I mean, partile, every same degree, Saturn and Neptune together, 25 and change, Aquarius, Pluto, 25, 23 Aries, Mars, 25, 58 Virgo. And the finger of God.
And what's the polarity point of that Mars?
Pisces.
When you have an apex, you always have a balancing point.
Which would be the midpoint in Pisces for Pluto and Saturn and Neptune in this chart too. I'll bring the whole chart back in. So I was interested in seeing, well, what was Jupiter doing at this time? That I don't know when it was that astrology kind of decided that Pisces was now Neptune's realm. I've wondered more about Mars than I have Jupiter and Saturn with traditional and modern rulerships. Like, how did Mars feel when clearly Pluto, who is so scorpionic, but when his, traditionally said his nocturnal or his feminine sign even was taken from him, and now he can only be the spear.
Well, maybe he was relieved.
Yeah.
Think about authenticity. To me, it's something we spoke about, and it's something that's going to rub many astrologers the wrong way. When I associate Neptune with the 12th house and Pisces and kind of see them as a theme. Because from this whole study, I can see, if we speak of the traditional rulership, I can see how Jupiter definitely captures the Piscean essence. But I can see where it doesn't do it completely. Like there are areas of Pisces that Jupiter does not reach. And one of them, you mentioned the word belief.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously a very strong connection between Sagittarius and Pisces. They're both, about the invisible, the greater potential, faith, spirituality.
Mm. Although very different too, right? Square and fire and water.
Exactly.
And, for me, sorry to interrupt you, but just to add this, because I think it will feed with your shares. From a Northern Hemisphere perspective, they are the first and the last moment of winter, right?
Uh-huh.
I mean, the last degree of Sagittarius is winter solstice, Northern Hemisphere, and the last degree of Pisces is spring equinox. And there's something about that traditional association of Jupiter, who on the way in to the winter time, the traditional Saturn place, says, I got your back. You're going to make it through. This is good for you. Go into your winter, see into the darkness, seek, but also roll out the scroll and enact the right prayer and ritual. And then we can get into the fundamentalism and all that stuff. But on the other side, and here comes the light. Good job. You've made it, right? So I don't like to lens astrology often through the Northern Hemispheric bias, as we're too often want to do. Yeah. But regardless, that, and on the way in, seeking, so let's just bring this to more general terms, seeking and climbing the mountain. And, it's such for me, it's seeking is not believing. That if we have a belief, there's no reason to look. We're only going to look for what we're told to find.
Exactly.
But when we release...
Or what we project.
Right. But when we release belief and seek, and can I ever know that I'm not just projecting here anyway, which is part of the illusion, but then we find, and what we find is not belief, then we find faith. And so that...
And truth.
In truth.
Because one of the aspects of Jupiter, and you see its position around the sun, right? Jupiter is before Saturn. It's the biggest planet. It captures these Sagittarius qualities very obviously. But it is a seeker because one of the Jupiterian impulses is there's more to life than this. My life is not just this job, or it's not just my routine, and it squares Virgo. There's more I need to explore, and so I go on a journey and learn about everything. But it's a fire sign. And then when I go on my journey, I come to all kinds of interpretations and belief systems that motivate me. Why is Sagittarius trining Aries? Because your beliefs drive your actions. If you believe in veganism, then you're going to you're going to lead a lifestyle that's responding to that. So your belief system drives your every mode of action. And with Pisces, you will read that about Neptune in Sagittarius, is when you have a crisis in belief. And when everything you thought was true doesn't make sense anymore. You have to let go of what you took for granted. And it's so deep because it conditions, your choices, your actions. I mean, I was a vegetarian and I believed in that because I don't want to harm animals. But I realized I was getting sick. That was a Neptune transit. So it told me, my own experience, doesn't matter what you believe. What matters is what is true. And you, at this point, are not going to be healthy as a vegetarian. And so I had to go against my convictions, against my natural drive. You know, it's like the same way Neptune square to Jupiter will prove you wrong. And you are going to come down your pedestal and take your sacred cows down the pedestal. Like nothing will make sense. The things that you praised will be demystified. And you'll see that if you are open and humble, you'll accept the truth and it's going to feed you. So that's part of the job of Neptune, is to take you in this open seas where you cannot even be prepared for what you're going to learn. Like you don't have a clue yet. It is the unknown. So your conditioning is completely dissolving.
So first is the comment, we're going to get to explore and experience that Jupiter square Neptune, right? Sagittarius, Jupiter square, Pisces, Neptune. I mean, for the first time since Neptune's discovery next year in 2019. I mean,
what do you mean?
Jupiter will ingress Sagittarius because Jupiter was last in Sagittarius in what, 2000?
Oh, I mean, in their respective signs.
Right. And Neptune ingressed Pisces in 2010.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
We also, I mean, right now we're experiencing these Jupiter trine Neptunes, Jupiter and Scorpio, and we just had that kind of powerful grand water trine with Venus in Cancer. But yeah, I mean, I've really been interested in that we go through these periods of time where Saturn's in Capricorn and Jupiter's in Sag, you know, and then they move.
And then Neptune's in Pisces, like all these rulerships.
Yeah, and then there's a time later with Jupiter in Pisces and Saturn in Aquarius, which that kind of shows that traditional piece. So,
but you're also going to have an interesting conjunction of Jupiter, Neptune in Pisces, like the two rulers of Pisces. Together in Pisces.
Yeah, for coming soon to a theater called you, folks. You just got to live through 2020, which is, you know, there's so many places I want to go here, but let me just make it about me. So I have Venus and Virgo, as you know, squaring Pisces, or sorry, Sagittarius, Neptune, and Neptune's here in Pisces now, opposite my Venus, and I'm in the middle of this transit. And when you speak about the unknowable and truth, but the things that you can't know are true, or I think it's very hard for us when we track transits and look to the future of transits, not to fall into a fear space. Like I've had Neptune described to me by a teacher who I have a lot of love for and trust for, as in looking at that Neptune and Mars on the peace fountain with their weapons, but as this malefic, that Pluto brings you into the underworld, but Neptune brings you up to the heavens and then drops you down to the underworld, so you fall twice as far. And it's like, oh gosh, because my first teacher, it was like Neptune's really glorified as this heavenly, and I don't know what the truth is, but if it's a time of unknowability, like I don't feel I teach Neptune transits so well or prepare for Neptune transits with clients so well. The fog is coming and it's here so that you can see a new light. And so enter the disillusion phase of the alchemical process. There's the burning, and then we're meant to flood the burnt matter to find the salts that are left before we can separate, you know, and enter the dream and the delusion and kind of lose our minds for a time. But how could I possibly prepare myself for a transit like that, or a Venus transit? There's wonderful love in my life right now.
Yeah, well, that's the great thing about astrology and astrologers, is that we keep being surprised. And we expect certain scenarios, and sometimes they happen, Sometimes it's completely different. And a person will have a Pluto transit and they're going to have this amazing experience, and they're not going to feel, the dread of the underworld and all that. And the same with Neptune. So there's an aspect, what Neptune represents is, the frontier that's beyond our ego. And that's where true learning is. And that's where you just have to shut up, zip it, and listen. Whereas Jupiter is the talker, the teacher, the preacher, the educator. Neptune is silent. And it is about tuning in and being in a passive state, receiving rather than giving. So in that sense, what you're going to have quite often with Neptune Jupiter cycles, and we spoke of Madonna and Michael Jackson, it's interesting that the three most recognizable mega entertainers, pop stars, Prince, Michael Jackson, Madonna, were born in the same period of summer of 58. And this means they all have Jupiter and Neptune conjunct the North Node. And Michael Jackson died on a Neptune-Jupiter conjunction, and Prince died on a Jupiter-Neptune opposition. And Madonna's still around. So why is that? Because what you have with Jupiter, Neptune, they're so boundless that they're manic. Because you touch the greatest spiritual realms together. And it can lead to this mega fame, or it can lead to, spiritual realization. But at the same time, it can lead to manic depression. Because from this ecstasy, you have a deflation that follows. When Neptune pumps Jupiter up and then drains it. And that's when you realize that everything you thought was real is not. And you have a crisis in belief.
Right.
And, if we go back to these personalities, we see Prince, for example, who was very successful until he became a born again. Jehovah's Witness, which, he took that Jupiter and Neptune from a place of glamour and grandiosity and funk to a place of Jehovah's Witness, faith, and belief systems. And because it opposes his Venus, all the sexiness was gone. He became, this very conservative.
He was still sexy.
But he hid his body. He stopped being this sex machine. So what you have with Jupiter Neptune is this tremendous expansion and then deflation that can create mania, depression. And it's
What's the balance? What's the remedy?
It is actually one of the signature for the medical condition. People who suffer from manic depression often have very strong Neptune-Jupiter interplaying dynamics. Neptune in the 12, Jupiter in the 12, Jupiter-Neptune aspects. And the balance is don't be attached to your truth.
Yeah, you said earlier that we're surprised all the time in astrology, right? You're predicting the terrible Pluto Sun transit, and then suddenly you have this glorious time in your life. But you have to allow yourself to be surprised, right?
And I think that's what Jupiter Neptune is about, is really the practice of revelation. Instead of talking, start listening.
Mm-hmm.
And then transmit the message, but without, why is Jupiter proselytizing? Why is it so, sometimes dogmatic and self-righteous? Because Jupiter as a mutable sign feels that if I have the truth and it's different from yours, one of us is wrong, because there is one truth. So Jupiter is actually tapping into the Neptune, the timelessness.
Yeah.
But it thinks that its piece of the sky is everything.
Yeah. I mean, he's huge. I mean, you can fit every planet inside Jupiter. And I mean, we were looking at Jupiter last night. It's just beaming. I mean, almost competing in luminosity with Venus. And, there's this thing. We were speaking about temperament earlier when we were walking around. And Jupiter is actually known as an air planet, interestingly, because there's, no air element in Sag or Pisces. And that was certainly part of the traditional association. But air is known as hot and wet. So hot lifts us up. It adds excitement. It's a moving sign, and the wet connects us. I mean, to study wet and dry, you simply take some dirt and put some water on it, and you can see that individual grains of sand, have an individuality. Once the water comes in, it's one mud. So the wetness is about a connection, and Neptune feels certainly in that wet way, but also probably more cold. I mean, Neptune's actually cold as being out there. Mm-hmm. And to bring us down into that ability to receive and not to go out and look for it, but to know that the message is here. If you can just shut up and hear, right? Which is a really fun homonym, actually. Here
on this note.
Well, let me ask you two things before we shut down, because I wanted to share a couple images. We're going to go have dinner, I hope. But I did want to ask the finger of God, as some call the yod, and how it's formed of quincunxes and inconjunct aversions, they're called. Like, so what is that invisibility that actually is spirit? Or
well, I studied the yod quite a bit, but I came to a different conclusion.
It's not something I've done yet. So
to me, the finger of God, the yod, is a very powerful configuration, but it's a point of mastery. And it is such a delicate line to walk that you are either a master or you're in constant crisis. And part of the mastery is centeredness and humility. Like, if you take yourself for granted, or if you think you know it all, that yod is going to humble you. So I like to look at aspects relative to the Aries point. So the apex would be the Aries point, and one leg will lead to Virgo, the other leg to Scorpio. And what are Virgo and Scorpio doing? They're fixers. They're constantly feeding on lack and improvement. Virgo does it in a mechanical way. Scorpio does it in an emotional way. Scorpio is the therapist. Virgo is the, what do you call it? When you bring your car to the shop. The mechanic. So the mechanic and the therapist are working on you. And the goal is the apex. So you want to achieve that, and these are your resources.
And the apex, in that case, where we're looking Aries, Virgo, Scorpio, would be Libra or Aries?
No, it's the Aries
pointing towards Aries, yeah.
So in this case, in this chart, the Aries point is Mars in Virgo. The Virgo leg is Neptune. and Saturn, and the Scorpio leg is Pluto. That's so interesting that they are actually, in their
It's so
own
strong.
position there.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to me, here's Saturn, we bring Uranus back in Aries, and I'm just tripping on this Antisha with Mercury, but Saturn at this point, I would imagine people have been practicing Uranus as the ruler of Aquarius for some time by this point. I know Uranus was discovered in 1781. He actually didn't even have the formal name Uranus. They tried Neptune on Uranus, for a while. But I wonder when astrologers made that shift. And then I love seeing Saturn with Neptune here in Aquarius, and then Jupiter in Gemini. You were speaking earlier today about Gemini as kind of these winds of pollination. I've always been, since I've looked at traditional rulerships or rulerships at all, because I didn't start in a system that honors rulerships, looking at that debate that doesn't have to be one. And did we discover these planets in the physical realms, with telescopes, because we were ready for them, because we were ready to evolve? We had to be surprised by Uranus. If there hadn't yet been the so-called Copernican revolution and a heliocentric cosmology, we wouldn't have been able to see beyond Saturn. That was the shift that was necessary to prepare the space for the revelation. But then we're looking for new revelations. We're looking for Neptune. We're looking for Pluto. And to find
just shift, like we're looking for dark matter.
Right.
There must be something out there. And yet you see science constantly reinventing itself. Oh, we thought, that it was only Newtonian physics.
Right.
And we realized there's a whole other mechanism. We thought, that women were only made to produce babies. And then we realized, they can actually do math. We come with all kinds of conditioning and perceptions, and we are proven wrong. And I think it's okay, because one of the things that also I speak about in this book, you will see at the end of each chapter, there's a little paragraph that says the freedom of peace. And that's where we forgive God. Not ask for forgiveness, but we forgive God for what?
The human experience.
The human experience. Like, we didn't ask to have an ego.
Or did we? But, right. For me, it's been forgiveness, not only the forgiveness of self for choosing to have this experience as a soul. So you're taking it to a higher level, which I feel is beautiful.
To me, having an ego is the hardest thing that we could possibly do. And why do it? If you speak from a selfish point of view, why do it if you can be in the cosmic womb where, eternity is who you are? Why separate? Why want to incarnate? So it's a service, and it's a huge uphill battle.
Yeah.
So,
but it's also kind of impossible. You know what I mean? Like, to unrealize the oneness, to disconnect from source, to come have an individual, just that the feeling that there is a kind of spiritual impossibility, that when you talk about the construction project and how Earth is not yet finished, it seems that this place, and maybe many, many, many others, were in a way constructed as projects, as places where we could come feel this illusion of separation, to have an individual experience of growth. And I think that the greatest...
But why grow?
Right, why grow? See, but that's it, you know, look at Neptune here, right? So Neptune, as you said before, there's no need to evolve. All evolution has already been done in the moment of creation. So why...
And yet...
Right, and yet
we're here.
We're born. And so I love this yoga, because you said this is beautiful, that the statue before, she's the ascendant between Pisces and Aries. But then, you know, here she's playing a kind of different role. I guess I'd have to look in a different space than I thought. I'm trying to bring Pluto into this. But yeah, there is this need to evolve. There is this wish to be born. There is this desire to connect to a place where survival is this theme, you know, that in Neptune and Pisces and the 12th, and the mystical and the poetic and the musical and the channeling of that source and that essence, where does it come from? And it comes through individuals, you know? So I'm just going to speed through these because I think we're wrapping up, but I want to see, this is at the time of Neptune's discovery, where the March equinox point was, to see that we're in this age of Pisces, and it's very strongly configured towards the beginning of Pisces from one direction, or the end of Pisces from the second direction. Because I wanted to speak about, we're in this transition between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, and maybe the discovery of Uranus was a significant spark in the beginning of the shift, and the discovering of Neptune, and that Aquarian and Pisces correlation that's come into these new planets and these invisible planets. But how do we choose to fully embrace this Piscean age? So your book is called Neptune, the 12th house, and Pisces, not Pisces, Neptune in the 12th house. But what about that? What about the full signature of they all come together? And we have many, many beings on the planet now since 2010 with Pisces, Neptune in the 12th house.
Well, it's a triple dose, you know, of this archetype. And you're going to see this generation who is born with Neptune in Pisces and Pluto in Capricorn, most of them.
Yeah.
Are both, you know, natural born leaders, because they have a collective consciousness and they will see through corruption. But in some ways, these are children that are almost born too mature, and they may be so attuned and aware about what's going on in the world, whether they feel the pain or whether they see the solutions. They're going to want to engage on a collective level, that in some ways they're going to lose their, you know, it's almost like becoming too aware too quickly. So there's a something about, you know, parenting these kids where they do need to take life a little less seriously. They do need to just play and not try to save everyone and not try to resolve all the problems and sponge everything in, because they do need to find themselves before they can go and save the world. They need to have some fun. Otherwise, it's a very heavy burden on
Most of them will have Uranus in Aries or Uranus in Taurus.
Well, which adds to, I can do this. You know, I'm going to make the change, and you know.
And so often in that long-standing Neptune-Pluto sextile, and this kind of generational signature, that Pluto speaks of generations or mini generations, collective quest of change and evolution. And Neptune shows us where the healing is often, right? Or where maybe we'll say where the hearing is. So that like I'm of the Pluto and Libra crew, and therefore the Neptune and Sagittarius crew. And it really feels that until I do Neptune and Sagittarius, I won't be able to direct the impulse of Libra Pluto in a way that is balanced. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Pluto and Capricorn, where there is significant restructuring and change, asks the Pisces Neptune piece, as you said, to stop and listen and hear and relax that need to, I can do it and I can change. And maybe Uranus into Taurus will help bring some earthing.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that great geniuses were born with Uranus in Taurus and Neptune in Pisces. One of them was Tesla. Another one was Gaudi. Completely different directions. You know, one was an inventor, the other one was an architect. And those who know Gaudi, you know, he is one of the most amazing architects. He made all these very extravagant constructions in Barcelona. And so why are they so amazing? Because they brought the earth and the sky together. They brought spirit into flesh. And Gaudi built the most amazing cathedral. Talk about body, you know, being a temple. So he, you know, I think should be on everyone's bucket list to visit Barcelona and the Sagrada Familia, because it is you know, astrologically, it's a great way to see how that's embodied. And Tesla spoke about universal energy and free energy for everyone, always, which is tapping into that Neptune in Pisces, the availability of endless, timeless energy, and bring it into matter in the physical way.
Speaking of matter, we should eat some food. You know, I wanted to show this image because we have the two fish, very big ones, killer whales.
Which I hope to see in 2-3 days.
Yeah, because that was an illusions part of the story I was going to get into last night. I said, so when do what time is the circus on Monday? And Maurice said, what are you talking about? Because I got a text message from him that said, do you want to go to circus with me and Shannon? I said, yeah, Monday. And so last night he was actually ready to go see the whales. And what do you mean the whales? We're going to go see the orcas. And I said, I thought you said the circus, which was strange anyway, right? And I said, the text auto-corrected, and he showed me the evidence. It says orcas very clearly. But I've therefore read circus, and I still need to sit with what the hell that means. But I love the opportunity of delusion and confusion and illusion to help open up the way to truth. And I love this idea of, I don't know, these beautiful beings, these massive beings, these whales, which I think need to be released from this terminology of them as killers. And so it's nice to hear their true name is orcas more and more. All right. So Neptune, the 12th house, and Pisces, the timelessness of truth, folks. Pick it up. MauriceFernandez.com. Here is iAstrologer.
Next time
we'll talk about that. So let me just say that Maurice is the president of the Organization for Professional Astrology. So look at opaastrology.org. And you'll find iAstrologer, which is a retreat that's happening in October in Tucson, and teaching astrologers how to promote and ready their practice and clean up the presentation. But it's not just for professional astrologers, I should say. And I'm teaching 3 days of astronomy for astrologers there, so check it out online. Also, the Career Astrologer is OPA's quarterly magazine, which is free. It comes first to people who are members of OPA, which I should all be. Highly recommend. It is an organization where you get more than you pay for. Webinars a couple times a month, and just amazing. All right, so time for us to go feed the whale, as it were. We're going to go eat Turkish food because we're doing a work with Onur Doser, the great Turkish astrologer in Mexico in January. And I felt like it was a way that Maurice and I and Onur could all sit together because we'll eat the food of his land.
Wonderful.
All right, Maurice, thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah. Thank you, friends, for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this whenever in space and time you are tuning in. And we will see you again. Cheers.